So today's lesson is about how the European powers carved up the New World. Imagine North and South America and the Caribbean islands. All of them are a big cooked turkey. Around the table, you have Britain, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal. All the main European powers are sitting around the table, their big old knife and fork, and they all want a piece of this sweet new turkey. So today we figure out who got what, how did they interact with each other, what did they do with their new territory, things like that. So in the 1500s, Spain built its empire in the Americas. It started with the conquistadors, and it ended up spreading from South America through Central America, all the way up in North America, and including the Caribbean islands. And then the 1600s rolls in, and a new foe approaches. The rest of Europe decides they want a piece of this pie. They saw how well Spain was doing, and they want to get involved too. Before we get to the other people, let's focus on Spain for a moment. Spanish rulers sent viceroys. You might think of them as territorial governors to run these new American territories. For the most part, they enslaved natives for agricultural labor, and they put a considerable amount of effort into converting the natives to Catholicism, but for the most part, they worked on things like growing food and sugarcane plantations, as well as gold and silver mines. When the Spanish needed even more labor, they began to ship in African slaves. In time, the smuggling of Native Americans, African slaves, and the Spanish would give rise to a whole new culture. Moving on to Portugal, there's not much on Portugal other than that their main empire was Brazil. It was explored in the 1500s by Pedro Alvarez Cabral, and they used African slave labor to grow a number of cash crops like sugarcane, tobacco, coffee, and cotton. Brazil was essentially just a big cash cow for Portugal. The French. Now pay attention because we'll learn about this next year. The French were all about the fur trade in North America. They sent Samuel de Champlain to explore the region and set up a trading post in what is now Quebec. The most profitable furs were beaver pelts. New France ended up consisting of what is much of eastern Canada today, and as time passed, they went south along the Mississippi, claiming a large chunk of North America. They made it all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty big turf they have. And then the English. Well, English colonies. Next year we'll learn about this in exceptional detail. But for now, know this. The first English colony was Jamestown, and although half the people died of starvation in the first winter, they survived and ended up thriving by growing tobacco, which was good because Jamestown was essentially a venture to make money. Other English colonies would form, some for debtors, some for profits, and some, as we often learn about the Pilgrims, religious dissidents like Puritans and separatists. Alright, the Dutch, the little-known Dutch. Dutch people are from the Netherlands, so consider those two words, either or. So the Dutch had broken away from Spain in the 1500s. They weren't very big, but figured they could compete and survive through trade. 1600s were a really good year. Really good years. It was a good century for the Netherlands. Their ships were better than the ships of their competitors. They could haul more goods with smaller crews. So an English explorer, Henry Hudson, had claimed a chunk of the Atlantic coast of North America for the Dutch, and they began to settle there. Their most famous was the island of Manhattan. It was called New Amsterdam. It was a very prosperous and diverse city that began to form. One day the British pretty much rolled in and said, "This is ours now," and the Dutch governor just kind of gave it to them. There's a warship in the bay. From that point on, it was called New York, so you can see how that turned out for the Dutch. There it was. Now belongs to Britain. World trade. Alright, let's take a step back from specific nations and talk about how they all interacted with each other. So, the world was getting carved up. There was a little less fighting, a little more money making. The dominant economic theory of the time was called mercantilism. So mercantilism goes like this. Everyone is scrambling to the top of the pile to be the most powerful. And how do you do that? You have to have the most money, mostly in the form of precious metals like gold and silver. So how does one make the most money? Well, you need to export more than you import, so you're making money. And part of that means gobbling up new lands, colonizing them, and taking in their raw materials to turn them into goods. So every country was colonizing like crazy to get raw materials to make goods to sell. Like this little picture here. You get your colony, you get your gold and your silver, your food, and your raw materials. So Europeans were going everywhere to set up profitable colonies. North America, of course, they started trading with Asia, started colonizing India, and places like Japan, setting up trade deals with them, which was new. With European weapons, the shogun of Japan was actually able to defeat all the other feudal lords and unite Japan for the first time in a very long time. Alright, business, aka commerce, changed in the 1600s. With all this colonization and business going on, the 1600s is sometimes referred to as the Commercial Revolution. Now, to make money, you need to spend money. At the time, sending expeditions and financing large ships to trade was very expensive. Not a lot of people could do it. And if a ship was lost at sea, it was a huge loss for the individual that financed that expedition. So, very risky business. To spread this cost out so that more people could take part in this process, a new type of company was created. It was called a joint stock company. Basically, instead of one man financing an expedition or a voyage, many men would do it. They'd all pay a little bit. This way, if the voyage was a success, a lot of people would make a little bit of money. Or if the ship was lost, a lot of people would lose a little bit of money. So it spread out the possible profit, and it spread out the possible risk. It's called a joint stock company. People that invested like this, they invested in these voyages, were called entrepreneurs. Today you think of that as like they're in some ways the same. They're taking a risk, but when you think of entrepreneur, it's kind of like a small business owner, someone starting their own business. Whereas in this context, it is someone that invests in a voyage. Like I said, it spread out that risk, but it also spread out the reward. Small note, merchants were looking to save money at this time. Big changes were happening. They thought that guilds, like trade, craft guilds that we talked about in the Middle Ages, they charged too much. It took too long to create goods, so merchants actually started to hire peasants to make goods in their homes. Mostly things like textiles, wool cloth variety items. This was called the cottage industry because goods were literally being created in cottages, which is what their homes were called at the time. All this colonization and trade throughout the entire world made for a massive exchange of technology, ideas, and diseases as well. Historians call this the Columbian Exchange, named after the man that triggered it with his discovery of the New World, Christopher Columbus. So examples of this change would be like the introduction of corn and potatoes to the European diet. Indians of the Great Plains were able to acquire horses from the Spanish that really changed their lives. In Italy, tomato sauce. Tomatoes came from the Americas. Tomatoes became a huge staple of their diet. And thank goodness for the Columbian Exchange, or we wouldn't have, pasta and meatballs. Did you hear about the Italian chef who died? He passed away. Thank you, Swedish chef. You're not Italian at all. Okay. Irony, right? Okay. You have an assignment today. Please answer the following questions with complete sentences. What is mercantilism? We went over that in good detail. Question 2. What was the Columbian Exchange? I feel like we went over that too. The book wouldn't be a bad place to look either for a little more details on these questions. That's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, hey, have a good one.